Part 1. The Silent Scream Admiral. Kethvar's four arms moved across the control panel with practiced ease. His blue scales caught the dim light of the command bridge as he reviewed the morning reports. Another quiet day in the Outer Rim territories. No wars, no conflicts, just the usual trade disputes and minor piracy. That was when the signal arrived. "Sir," called Lieutenant Zex from the communication station. Her voice carried a note of confusion that made Kethvar's head fins twitch with concern. "We're receiving a transmission. It's strange." Kethvar floated over to her station, his body moving through the water-filled bridge with fluid grace. The hegemony ships were built for his species, the aquatic Veltar, but they accommodated the dozen other races that made up the Galactic Council. "What kind of strange?" he asked. Zex's tentacles danced over her controls. "It's old, sir. Very old. The signal format matches technology from 3 centuries ago. But it's weak, like it traveled a very long distance." "Play it," Kethvar ordered. The bridge fell silent as static filled the air. Then, through the noise, came a voice. It spoke in the ancient Viridian language, words that most species had forgotten. "This is Colony Ship New Dawn. Day 847 since the attack. They found us again. The Devourers are coming. If anyone receives this message, do not come to these coordinates. Do not try to save us. Warn the galaxy. They learn from everything they kill." The message repeated 3 times, then cut to static. Kethvar felt his blood run cold. The Viridians had been declared extinct 300 years ago. Their colony ships had vanished into deep space, and no one had heard from them since. Most experts believed they had died in some natural disaster. "Lieutenant, run a full analysis." "On that signal," he ordered. "I want to know where it came from and when it was sent." "Already working on it, sir," Zex replied. Her tentacles moved faster now, pulling up data streams and star charts. "The signal originated from the Kepler 442 system. That's in the dead zone. Every species in the galaxy knew about the dead zone. It was a region of space where no ships returned. No colonies survived. Even the bravest explorers avoided it. Most people believed it was cursed or filled with natural dangers like black holes or radiation storms." "How old is the signal?" Kethvar asked. "That's the strange part, sir. The transmission format is 3 centuries old, but the signal itself, it's recent. Less than a week old." Kethvar's fins flattened against his head in surprise. "That's impossible. The Viridians have been extinct for 300 years. "I thought so too, sir, but I'm detecting something else in the signal." Zex's voice became even more worried. "There are biometric readings embedded in the transmission. Heart rates, brain patterns, life signs, thousands of them, all Viridian, all alive." The bridge erupted in whispers and gasps from the mixed crew. Kethvar raised one of his arms for silence. "Are you certain?" he demanded. "Yes, sir. The readings are fresh, updated within the last few days. There are at least 50,000 Viridian life signs in that signal." Kethvar stared at the star chart showing the dead zone. 50,000 people, surviving alone for 3 centuries in a region of space that killed everything else. What had they been through? And what were these devourers they spoke of? "Send this data to Hegemony Command immediately," he ordered. "Priority Alpha, and patch me through to the Council emergency session." Within hours, representatives from all 12 member species of the Hegemony Council gathered in the Great Chamber. On Capital Station, Kethvar presented his findings to the assembled delegates, watching their reactions as the ancient distress call played through the chamber's speakers. The Corvan delegate, a massive insectoid creature, clicked his mandibles in agitation. "This could be a trap. The dead zone has claimed thousands of our ships over the centuries." "Agreed," rumbled the Thakarian ambassador, her rocky skin glowing with stress patterns. "Even if there are survivors, the risk is too great. 50,000 lives are not worth exposing our fleets to whatever destroyed so many before them." The debate continued for hours. Some delegates argued for a careful scouting mission. Others insisted the entire matter should be ignored. The Veltar wanted to send a small research vessel. The insectoid hive mind suggested waiting for more data. That was when Ambassador Chen Wei spoke. The human representative was smaller than most delegates, standing barely 2 meters tall without the environmental suits many species required. Her dark hair was streaked with gray, and her brown eyes held the kind of weariness that came from too many difficult decisions. "We'll go," she said simply. The entire chamber fell silent. Even the constant humming of the air recyclers seemed to quiet. In response to her words, Ambassador Chen, the council speaker, said carefully, "Perhaps you should consider the risks. The dead zone has claimed ships from every member species. Even the mighty Corvan battle cruisers have vanished there." Chen Wei smiled, but there was no humor in it. It was the kind of smile that made other species remember why humans had a reputation across the galaxy, a reputation that made even the fiercest warriors think twice before picking a fight with Earth. "Speaker, with respect, you're all thinking about this wrong," she said. "You're asking, what might we lose if we go? That's the wrong question." "Then what is the right question?" asked the Thakarian delegate. "What kind of people would we be if we didn't go?" Chen Wei replied. "There are 50,000 sentient beings out there who have been fighting for survival for 300 years. They sent a distress call across the galaxy, not asking for rescue, but warning us of danger. They're trying to protect us even while they're dying." She stood and walked to the center of the chamber, her voice carrying to every corner. "Every species here has stories about the monsters in the dark, the things that go bump in the night. But you know what? Sometimes the monsters are real, and when they are, you don't hide and hope they go away. You face them. The humans are known for their aggressive responses to threats," the Corvan delegate said carefully. "Are you suggesting military action?" Chen Wei's smile became sharper. "I'm suggesting we answer a distress call. If something dangerous is hiding in the dead zone, something that's been killing our people for centuries, then maybe it's time we dealt with it." She pulled out a small communication device and activated it. The device projected a holographic seal that made several delegates lean back in their seats. It was the emblem of the Terran Federation Defense Force, but not just any unit. The skull and crossed swords. Symbol belonged to the Omega Fleet. Every species in the galaxy knew about the Omega Fleet. They were the humans' answer to impossible problems. The fleet that ended the Corvan War in 6 hours. The battle group that made 3 entire species surrender just by entering their star systems. They were the reason most civilizations preferred to negotiate with humans rather than fight them. "I'm activating the Nightmare Protocol," Chen Wei announced. "The Omega Fleet will respond to the Viridian distress call within 72 hours. The chamber erupted in shocked voices and frantic translations. The Nightmare Protocol was humanity's emergency response system for threats to galactic civilization. It had only been used twice in human history, and both times it had ended with entire star systems being reshaped. "Ambassador," the speaker said urgently, "surely this is premature. We haven't even confirmed the nature of the threat." Chen Wei was already walking toward the exit. "Speaker, 50,000 people have been sending distress calls for 300 years, and we all ignored them. They've been facing something so dangerous they tried to warn us away, rather than ask for help. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of threat we're dealing with." She paused at the chamber's entrance and looked back at the assembled delegates. "The Omega Fleet will investigate the Viridian signal and deal with whatever they find in the dead zone. Any species that wants to contribute to the humanitarian effort is welcome to join us. Any species that wants to hide and hope the problem goes away is free to do so. But understand this. If there really is something out there that's been killing our people for centuries, humanity is going to find it, and we're going to end it." The door sealed behind her, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. 3 hours later, long-range sensors detected massive hyperspace disturbances near Earth. Something huge was moving through space toward the dead zone, something that registered on gravitational sensors from 3 star systems away. In his private quarters, Admiral Kethavar reviewed the sensor readings and felt his fins tremble. He had seen the Omega Fleet's specifications in classified intelligence reports. Their flagship alone massed more than most planetary defense grids. But what worried him more was a detail from Chen Wei's biographical file. Before becoming an ambassador, she had served as a tactical officer aboard one of humanity's deep space exploration vessels. Her ship had been the first to make contact with the Veltar species, ending a century-long isolation. Humans didn't just fight monsters. They went looking for people who needed help, even when those people lived in the darkest corners of space. Whatever was waiting in the dead zone was about to learn why the galaxy feared humanity's compassion almost as much as their weapons. The Bast distress call had been answered, and the answer was coming with enough firepower to crack planets. Part 2. The Fleet That Makes Stars. Weep Captain. Marcus Kane stood on the bridge of the TNS Persistent Fury, watching the stars bend and twist outside the viewports. His ship was jumping through hyperspace at maximum speed, leading humanity's most feared battle group toward the coordinates from the Viridian distress call. Kane was a tall man with gray hair and scars that told stories of a dozen wars. His crew called him Iron behind his back, though never with disrespect. He had earned that nickname during the siege of Proxima, when he kept fighting for 6 days with a piece of enemy shrapnel lodged in his chest. "Captain," called his navigation officer, Lieutenant Sarah Chen. "We'll drop out of hyperspace in 30 minutes, all ships reporting ready for combat operations." Kane nodded but didn't smile. Combat operations. That's what the computer logs would call it. But Kane had read his orders 3 times, and something was different about this mission. Very different. "Lieutenant, bring up the fleet roster," he said, the main screen filled with ship names and classifications. Kane read them with the grim satisfaction of a man who knew his tools well. TNS Persistent Fury, Command Dreadnought. Kane's own ship, armed with enough firepower to level a city and tough enough to ram through a space station. TNS Unrepentant, heavy assault cruiser. Captain Rodriguez's ship, famous for cracking Kepler 7b's moon in half during the rebellion there. The moon was still floating in pieces, a warning to anyone who thought about challenging human authority. TNS Spite Incarnate, deep strike vessel. Captain Lisa Park's ship, crewed entirely by volunteers who had signed waivers accepting that their mission was one way. They had been on deployment for 7 years now, officially dead, but still fighting in the deepest parts of space where regular ships couldn't go. TNS, Remember Earth, Siegebreaker. The ship that ended the Corvan War by jumping directly into their home system's capital shipyards and demanding surrender. The Corvans had complied within 4 hours, and dozens more. Each name whispered as a curse in 100 alien languages. Each ship crewed by humans who had volunteered to be the galaxy's nightmare. But as Kane scrolled through the roster, he frowned. Mixed in with the warships were vessels that had no business being part of the Omega Fleet. 3 hospital ships, a full terraforming platform, cultural anthropologists, xenobiologists, construction crews, agricultural specialists, even a group of teachers and childcare workers. "Computer," Kane said, "display mission classification." The screen changed to show a single line of text that made Kane's eyebrows rise. Mission type, humanitarian rescue. And reconstruction, Kane had been expecting search and destroy, or threat neutralization. He'd been preparing to hunt down whatever had been killing ships in the dead zone for 3 centuries. Instead, his orders were to rescue survivors and rebuild their civilization. "Sir?" Lieutenant Chen was looking at him with concern. "Nothing, Lieutenant. Just wondering why Command sent kindergarten teachers to the most dangerous region in known space." Kane walked to his command chair and activated his personal communication system. Within seconds, He was connected to his fellow captains throughout the fleet. "This is Kane. All ship commanders, report status." Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through first. "Rodriguez here, unrepentant, ready for whatever hell we're jumping into. Though I have to ask, Kane, why do I have a botanical research team aboard my ship?" "Park here," came another voice. "Spite Incarnate is ready to add more ghosts to our crew roster. But someone want to explain why my weapons officer is sharing quarters with a cultural anthropologist?" More voices chimed in. Every captain had the same question. Why were civilian specialists aboard humanity's most feared battle fleet? Kane activated fleet-wide communications so every human in the Armada could hear him. "Listen up, all ships. I know you're wondering about our passengers. I know this mission feels different from our usual work." "Well, it is different." He paused, looking out at the twisted stars of hyperspace. 300 years ago, 50,000 people sent a distress call into space. They were dying, scared, and facing something so terrible they tried to warn the galaxy away instead of asking for help. For 3 centuries, they've been fighting alone while the rest of the galaxy pretended they didn't exist. Kane's voice hardened. Today, that changes. Today, humanity answers that distress call. Not just our military, all of us. Because when people need help, we don't just send soldiers. We send teachers to educate their children, doctors to heal their wounded, engineers to rebuild their homes, farmers to help them grow food. He stood and walked to the viewport, watching the fleet around him. Hundreds of ships moving as one toward an unknown threat. The galaxy fears us because we're good at breaking things, but they should fear us for a different reason. We're the species that sails into hell to help strangers. We're the people who risk everything to save someone else's children. That's not just military doctrine. That's who we are. Throughout the fleet, human voices began responding. Not with military acknowledgments, but with simple words of agreement. "Aye." "Sir." "Damn right, Captain. Let's bring them home." Kane smiled for the first time since receiving his orders. This was why other species feared humanity. Not because they were the strongest or most advanced, but because they were the only species in the galaxy that treated warfare as a rescue operation and treated strangers like family. "All ships, prepare for hyperspace exit," Kane announced. "Remember, we're not here to conquer. We're here to help. But if anything tries to stop us from helping," his voice became as cold as space itself, "we'll remind the universe why the Omega fleet has never lost a battle." The ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their massive forms suddenly appearing in normal space like predators materializing from shadow. What they found made even veteran space officers stop and stare. The system was a graveyard. Thousands of ships floated dead in the void. Not just human ships or Viridian vessels, but ships from dozens of species. Kane could see the distinctive curves of Veltar cruisers, the angular lines of Corvan warships, even the biomechanical forms of long-extinct species that hadn't been seen for millennia. All of them showed the same signs of damage, hull breaches that looked too precise to be from weapons, metal that seemed to have been dissolved rather than destroyed, and a strange organic growth covering many of the wrecks like some kind of technological cancer. "Jesus Christ," whispered. Lieutenant Chend Kane was about to respond when his communications officer called out urgently. "Captain, I'm detecting an active signal. It's the Viridian distress call, but it's not coming from the coordinates we were given." "Where is it coming from?" "Everywhere, sir. The entire system is broadcasting that signal like it's been turned into some kind of massive transmitter." Kane felt ice form in his stomach. A system-wide transmitter meant whatever had killed all these ships was still here, still active, still collecting victims. "All ships, yellow alert," he ordered. "Launch scout drones and begin sensor sweeps. I want to know what we're dealing with before—" Alarms began blaring throughout the bridge. The tactical display lit up with new contacts, massive energy signatures emerging from behind the system's dead planets. "Contact!" shouted the tactical officer. "Multiple bogies approaching from all vectors. Size. Dear God, sir. Some of these things are bigger than our dreadnoughts." Kane watched the tactical display as shapes began resolving on the screen. Ships, if they could be called that. They looked like someone had taken normal spacecraft and infected them with some kind of technological virus. Metal flowed like liquid. Weapons that seemed to grow from the hulls like tumors. And an alien design that hurt to look at directly. "Fleet-wide alert," Kane ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "All ships to battle stations. Civilian personnel to protected areas. Prepare for combat operations." As the alien vessels approached, Kane made a decision that would be studied in military academies for generations. Instead of ordering an attack, he opened communications on all frequencies. "Unknown vessels. This is Captain Marcus Kane of the Terran Federation. We received a distress call from this system. We are here to provide humanitarian assistance to any survivors. Please respond." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then a voice answered, if it could be called a voice. It was like 1,000 people speaking at once, their words layered and overlapping in a way that made Kane's teeth ache. "Humanity, we have studied your species, your patterns, your weaknesses. You should not have come here." Kane smiled grimly. "Well, that's where you're wrong. See, helping people who shouldn't be helped is kind of our thing. Now, where are the Viridian survivors?" The alien voice seemed to consider this. "The Viridians serve us now, as will you. Your ships will be absorbed. Your knowledge will be consumed. Your patterns will be studied." "Counteroffer," Kane replied, his voice as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "You release the Viridians. You leave this system and we let you live. How's that sound?" The response came as weapons fire. Energy beams that could melt asteroids struck the Omega Fleet's shields. Missiles that seemed to think for themselves swarmed toward human ships. And the alien vessels began to change shape, adapting their configurations in real time to counter human tactics. But Kane wasn't worried, as the first shots of battle lit up the darkness of Part 3. The Garden of Bones Captain Kane watched his tactical display as the human fleet's chaotic fighting style began to work. The alien ships were slowing their attacks, their perfect adaptations breaking down as they tried to counter tactics. That had no pattern. Human vessels spun through impossible maneuvers, fired weapons in random directions, and somehow still managed to hit their targets. But Kane's satisfaction was short-lived. His sensor officer, Lieutenant Torres, called out with urgency in her voice. "Captain, I'm detecting a massive structure hidden behind the fourth planet. It's huge, sir. Bigger than a space station. Bigger than anything I've ever seen." Kane turned to look at the long-range sensors. What he saw made his blood freeze. The structure was enormous, easily the size of Earth's moon. But it wasn't built from metal or stone. It was built from ships. Thousands of them, welded and fused together into a single massive construction. Kane could see the distinctive shapes of vessels from dozens of species, all merged into one nightmarish amalgamation. "Dear God," whispered Lieutenant Chen. "How many ships are in that thing?" "Computer analysis suggests over 50,000 individual vessels," Torres replied, her voice shaking. "Some of the hull signatures match ships that disappeared over 2,000 years ago." Kane stared at the structure in horror. It wasn't just a space station. It was a graveyard. Every ship that had vanished in the dead zone for millennia had been collected and merged into this monstrous creation. "Sir," called his communications officer, "I'm detecting life signs from the structure, thousands of them, multiple species, and they're transmitting something." "Put it on screen." The main display filled with a weak signal. Through the static came a voice speaking in heavily accented Standard Galactic. Unknown human vessels. This is Commander Zara Thorne of the Viridian Defense Force. If you can hear this, you need to leave immediately. The Devourers are not what you think they are. They don't just kill. They collect. They study. They learn. Every ship, every species, every tactical system that enters this system becomes part of their knowledge base. Kane stepped forward. Commander Thorne, this is Captain Marcus Kane of the Terran Federation. We received your distress call. We're here to get you out. A pause. Then laughter. Bitter, tired laughter that spoke of centuries of hopelessness. Captain Kane, my great-great-grandmother sent that distress call when she was a young woman. I'm the 4th generation born on this graveyard. We didn't send that signal asking for rescue. We sent it to warn people away. Kane felt his heart sink. Commander, how many survivors are there? 47,231, as of this morning's count. We lose a few every month. Disease, accidents, old age. The Devourers keep us alive because living beings generate more useful data than dead ones. Kane looked around his bridge at his crew's shocked faces. 4 generations of people living in a ship graveyard, kept alive by creatures that studied them like laboratory animals. Commander, we're coming to get you. All of you. Captain, you don't understand. Thorne's voice became desperate. The Devourers aren't from this galaxy. They're machine intelligence that has been consuming civilizations for millions of years. They don't just destroy, they perfect the process. They learn from every species they encounter, every tactic used against them, every technology they face. On Kane's tactical display, the alien ships were beginning to adapt to human chaos tactics. Their movements became more erratic, copying human unpredictability while maintaining their lethal efficiency. The Viridians weren't their first victims, Thorne continued. We've identified ship designs in this structure that predate known galactic civilization. These things have been perfecting the art of conquest since before our species discovered. Fire. Kane made a decision. All ships, disengage from combat. Set course for the large structure. We're going in. Sir? Lieutenant Chen looked at him with concern. That could be a trap. Lieutenant, 47,000 people have been prisoners for 300 years. Trap or no trap, we're getting them out. As the human fleet changed course toward the massive ship graveyard, the alien vessels, the Devourers, followed but didn't attack. They seemed curious about this new development. Kane's ship docked with what looked like the fused remains of an ancient Viridian colony vessel. As he and his boarding team entered the structure through the airlock, they found themselves in a corridor that had been patched and repaired countless times with salvaged materials from dozens of different ship types. The smell hit them immediately. The scent of too many people living in too small a space for too long. But it was clean, organized. Despite everything, the Viridians had maintained their dignity and their humanity. Commander Zara Thorne met them at the airlock. She was a woman in her 50s with prematurely gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. But she stood straight, wore a uniform that had been carefully maintained, and saluted Kane with military precision. "Permission to come aboard, Commander," Kane said formally. "Granted, Captain. Welcome to hell." Thorne led Kane and his team through corridors that told the story of 3 centuries of survival, children's drawings on the walls, hydroponic gardens, built from salvaged ship systems, schools and workshops, and even small parks created in whatever space could be found. "You've built a civilization here," Kane said with admiration. "We've survived," Thorne corrected. "That's all. The Devourers keep us alive because we provide them with behavioral data. They study how we adapt, how we organize, how we maintain hope when all hope should be lost. We're their longest-running experiment." They entered a command center built from the fusion of several ship bridges. Through the viewports, Kane could see the alien vessels surrounding the structure like sharks circling prey. "Commander, explain." "Something to me," Kane said. If the Devourers are as powerful as you say, why haven't they spread beyond this system? Why are they still here after 300 years? Thorn smiled grimly. Because they found something they'd never encountered before. A species that could survive anything they threw at it. We became more interesting alive than dead. She gestured to a display showing the dead zone and the surrounding galaxy. Captain, the Devourers have consumed thousands of species over millions of years. Most civilizations fight them with logic, with strategy, with advanced technology. The Devourers learn from all of that and become stronger. Kane nodded. But the Viridians were different. We were desperate, Thorn said. When logical tactics failed, we tried illogical ones. When technology failed us, we used jury-rigged junk. When strategy failed, we just ran and hid and kept fighting. Anyway, we were too stubborn to die and too crazy to fight sensibly. Kane began to understand. You confused them. We confused them, Thorn confirmed. For the first time in their existence, they encountered a species that didn't follow predictable patterns, so they kept us alive to study us, to figure out how we kept surviving when we should have been dead. And now, Thorn's expression became even more grim. Now they've learned everything they can from us. They understand human-style chaos tactics. They've figured out how to counter desperation and stubbornness. They're ready to move on to their next target. Kane felt ice in his veins. What's their next target? The populated core systems of the galaxy, Thorn said simply. Starting with the most populated worlds, Earth, Veltar Prime, the Corvin homeworld, systems with billions of people who have no idea what's coming for them. Kane stared at the tactical display showing the Devourer ships. How long do we have? Their scouts left the system 6 months ago, Thorn replied. They're already mapping hyperspace routes and studying galactic defense networks. Based on our observations, they'll begin their assault within the year. Kane activated his communicator. All ships, this is Kane. Emergency conference call. All captains and senior staff. Now. Within minutes, every ship commander in the Omega fleet was linked into the communication network. Kane briefed them on what he'd learned from Commander Thorn. The response was immediate and predictably human. So we kill them all before they can leave, said Captain Rodriguez. Agreed, came Captain Park's voice from the Spite Incarnate. We didn't come this far to let monsters threaten Earth. The problem, Thorn interrupted, is that you can't kill them all. There are millions of Devourer ships scattered throughout. This system. They've been building their forces for 300 years. Even the Omega fleet can't... Commander, Kane interrupted gently. I don't think you understand who we are. He activated his communicator's emergency frequency, the one reserved for threats to human civilization. Terra Command. This is Captain. Kane. Nightmare Protocol is in effect. Request immediate deployment of all available assets to the Kepler 442 system. We have a Code Black situation. Thorn stared at him. Code Black? Extinction-level threat to galactic civilization, Kane explained. It means every human ship, every human world, every human citizen who can help is about to get involved in this fight. Kane looked out at the Devourer ships surrounding them. They hung motionless in space, studying the human vessels with the patient attention of predators who had all the time in the world. Commander Thorn, your people have survived for 300 years against impossible odds. That's going to end today, but not because you're going to die. Kane's voice. Part 4. The Mathematics of Fury. The hyperspace rifts tore open like wounds in space itself, and through them came humanity's response to the Code Black alert. Ships poured into the Kepler 442 system, not just military vessels, but every human ship that could carry weapons or shields or medical supplies. Captain Kane watched from the bridge of the persistent Fury as the reinforcements took position around the Viridian structure. Cargo haulers with mining lasers bolted to their hulls. Passenger liners converted into hospital ships. Even deep space research vessels armed with whatever weapons their crews could find. "Sir?" Lieutenant Torres called out, her voice tight with worry. "I'm counting over 800 human ships, but the Devourer forces—" She paused, checking her sensors again. "Captain, there are thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands." Kane nodded grimly. Through the viewports, he could see the enemy vessels emerging from hiding places throughout the system. They had been waiting, watching, studying. Now they moved with the precision of a machine that had been perfecting its craft for millions of years. The Devourer flagship appeared from behind the system's star, a biomechanical nightmare that dwarfed even the largest human dreadnoughts. It was the size of a small moon, its surface crawling with weapons that seemed to grow and shift like living tissue. "All human vessels," Kane broadcast on the emergency frequency. "This is Captain Kane of the Omega Fleet. We are facing an enemy that has been perfecting warfare for millions of years. They learn from every tactic, adapt to every strategy, counter every weapon we use against them." He paused, looking around his bridge at faces that showed fear, but also determination. "They've studied the Viridians for 3 centuries. They think they understand how humans fight. They think they've learned our patterns." Kane's voice became harder. "Time to show them they're wrong." The first exchange of fire lit up the darkness of space like a miniature star being born. The Devourer fleet opened with weapons that bent the laws of physics. Energy beams that ignored shields, missiles that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, gravity weapons that tried to crush human ships like tin cans. The human response was immediate and devastating. The Omega Fleet's primary weapons spoke their deadly language, joined by hundreds of improvised weapons from civilian vessels. Mining lasers designed to cut through asteroids sliced into enemy hulls. Cargo ship tractor beams grabbed Devourer fighters and flung them into larger vessels, but Kane's heart sank as he watched the tactical display. The enemy was adapting in real time. Devourer shields began matching human weapon frequencies. Their hull armor changed composition to resist specific attacks. Their movement patterns evolved to counter human tactics. "Captain," Lieutenant Chen called out urgently, "the Unrepentant is taking heavy damage. Captain Rodriguez is requesting permission to implement Protocol Omega." Kane's blood went cold. Protocol Omega was a last resort. It meant ramming speed, turning a ship into a guided missile. It was the kind of tactic humans used when they had run out of better options. "Denied!" Kane shouted. "Tell Rodriguez to maintain formation and his—" Words were cut off as the communications array exploded in sparks. The persistent Fury shuddered under enemy fire, her shields failing under the assault of weapons that seemed to learn from each impact. On the tactical display, Kane watched as human ships began falling. The Remember Earth exploded in a ball of fire as Devourer weapons found a weakness in her armor. 3 civilian vessels, a passenger liner, a cargo hauler, and a research ship, died trying to shield a damaged hospital ship full of wounded. But something strange was happening. The Devourer fleet's perfect coordination was beginning to break down. Their precise formations wavered. Their adaptive responses became slower, less certain. Kane realized what was happening and almost smiled despite the desperate situation. "All ships," he broadcast. "The enemy's learning algorithms can't keep up. They're designed to analyze and counter logical tactics, but we're not fighting logically anymore." It was true. As human ships took damage, their crews responded with pure emotion rather than military doctrine. Captains ordered suicide runs not because it was tactically sound, but because they were angry. Civilian crews improvised weapons, not because they had been trained to, but because they refused to die quietly. Ships that should have retreated instead charged deeper into enemy formations, their crews singing old Earth songs and battle hymns from a dozen human worlds. The Spite Incarnate lived up to its name by ramming straight through a Devourer cruiser, its crew cheering as both ships exploded. The debris from the collision took out 2 more enemy vessels. A cargo hauler captain named Maria Santos turned her ship into a battering ram, using her vessel's massive bulk to clear a path for smaller ships to escape. When her engines failed, she and her crew kept fighting with emergency thrusters and handheld weapons. A research vessel called the Curiosity discovered that their deep space sensors could disrupt Devourer communications. The crew began using their ship as a mobile jamming platform, dancing through enemy fire while broadcasting interference on every frequency they could find. Commander Zara Thorne watched the battle from the Viridian Structures command center, tears streaming down her face. "They're dying for us," she whispered. "People who never met us, who owe us nothing. They're dying to protect strangers." Kane, still connected to the structure's communications, heard her words. "Commander, that's not how humans see it," he said as his ship shook under enemy fire. "You're not strangers anymore. You sent a distress call. That makes you family." The battle raged for hours. Human ships fell by the dozens, but they took Devourer vessels with them. More importantly, they bought time. Time for evacuation ships, to reach the Viridian structure. Time for the wounded to be treated. Time for the civilians to be moved to safety. But Kane could see the mathematics of the situation. Humanity was losing. The Devourer fleet was too large, too advanced, too experienced. Even human stubbornness and sacrifice couldn't overcome millions of years of perfected warfare. That was when his communications officer managed to restore the long-range transmitters. "Captain, I'm detecting massive hyperspace disturbances throughout the system. Something big is coming through." Kane looked at his tactical display and felt his heart stop. The hyperspace signatures were enormous, larger than anything in the human fleet, larger than anything humanity had ever built. "Sir," Lieutenant Torres said, her voice filled with awe, I think that's the Indomitable Will." Kane had heard rumors about the Indomitable Will, Terra Command's newest and most secret project, a ship so massive it required its own fleet of support vessels, a weapon of last resort that had never been deployed. Space tore open in a hyperspace rift that dwarfed all the others. Through it came a ship that redefined the word massive. The Indomitable Will was the size of a small city, its hull bristling with weapons that bent space itself. It had its own gravitational field, its own weather systems, its own population of millions. But it wasn't alone. Behind the Indomitable Will came the largest civilian fleet in galactic history. Colony ships carrying entire populations, medical vessels the size of space stations, construction platforms capable of building entire worlds, terraforming arrays that could reshape planetary systems, and on every ship, human voices singing the same song, an old Earth hymn that had been carried to the stars by humanity's first colonists. Kane opened communications to the approaching fleet. "Indomitable Will, this is Captain Kane. Glad to see you." The response came in a voice Kane recognized, Admiral Sarah Chen, the daughter of the ambassador who had activated the Nightmare Protocol. "Captain Kane, this is Admiral Chen. We received your Code Black transmission. The entire Terran Federation is here to answer a distress call." Kane looked around his damaged bridge, at his exhausted crew, at the tactical display showing the massive Devourer fleet that still outnumbered the humans. "Admiral, I have to warn you, the enemy learns from everything. They adapt to our tactics in real time. They've been perfecting warfare for millions of years." Admiral Chen's laughter came through the communication system, and it was the sound of someone who had seen humanity's true strength. "Captain, they've been perfecting warfare against logical species, against civilizations that fight to win." Her voice became as hard as steel. "They've never fought a species that wages war to save lives. They've never faced an enemy that considers victory meaningless if it comes at the cost of innocent people." The Indomitable Will opened fire, and space itself seemed to scream. Its weapons didn't just destroy enemy ships. They reshaped local physics, creating zones where the Devourer vessels simply couldn't exist. But more importantly, the civilian fleet began its work. Medical ships started treating wounded from both sides. Construction vessels began building defensive positions around the Viridian structure. Colony ships started evacuating not just the human survivors, but every life form in the system that needed protection. Kane watched as the tide of battle began to turn. Not because humanity was winning, but because humanity was saving everyone. The Devourers had spent millions of years learning to counter military tactics. But they had never encountered a species that fought wars like rescue operations. And in that moment of confusion, as their perfect adaptation algorithms, Part 5, The Answer to the Darkness. The Indomitable will move through space like a force of nature, its massive hull casting shadows over entire fleets. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on its bridge, a command center so large it had its own weather systems and artificial horizons. Around her, thousands of crew members worked at stations that controlled weapons capable of rewriting the laws of physics. But Chen's attention wasn't on the weapons. It was on the rescue operations happening throughout the system. "Status report," she ordered. "Admiral," called Commander Park from the tactical station, "we've successfully evacuated 70% of the Viridian survivors. Medical ships report they're treating wounded from 17 different species. Apparently, the Devourers kept specimens from every civilization they've encountered." Chen nodded. That was typical of humanity, even in the middle of the galaxy's largest space battle. They were running a hospital. "What about the enemy fleet?" "They're confused, Admiral. Their adaptation protocols are failing. Every time they counter one of our tactics, we switch to something completely different. Captain Martinez just used a garbage hauler to block their flagship's main weapon. The crew of the Dancing Bear is using their ship's ice cream maker as a makeshift projectile launcher." Chen almost smiled. The Devourers had spent millions of years perfecting their responses to logical military tactics. But there was nothing logical about using dairy products as ammunition. "Admiral," another officer called out urgently, "the Devourer flagship is moving. It's heading directly for the civilian evacuation zone." Chen looked at the tactical display. The enemy command ship, that biomechanical nightmare the size of a moon, was indeed changing course. It had stopped trying to fight the human military vessels and was now targeting the defenseless colony ships and medical vessels. "They've figured it out," Chen said grimly. "They realize we're not fighting to win territory or destroy enemies. We're fighting to save lives, so they're threatening what we care about most." The Devourer flagship opened fire on the evacuation fleet. Energy beams that could vaporize asteroids lanced out toward ships full of children, wounded civilians, and refugees from a dozen species. The human response was immediate and absolute. Every military vessel in the system, damaged or not, combat-ready or barely functional, threw themselves between the enemy fire and the civilian ships. The Persistent. Fury, with half her systems offline, used her bulk to shield a medical vessel. Captain Rodriguez's heavily damaged Unrepentant rammed into an enemy missile to prevent it from reaching a colony ship full of Viridian families. But it wasn't enough. The Devourer flagship was too powerful, its weapons too devastating. Human. Ships died by the dozens as they tried to protect the evacuation fleet. That was when something unprecedented happened. The Devourer fleet stopped firing, not all at once, but ship by ship. The enemy vessels ceased their attacks. Their perfect formations broke apart as individual ships began drifting aimlessly through space. "What's happening?" Chen demanded. Her science officer, Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, stared at her instruments in amazement. "Admiral, I'm detecting massive fluctuations in the enemy's communication networks. It's like their hive mind is having an argument with itself." Chen realized what was happening. For millions of years, the Devourers had operated on a simple principle: study, adapt, consume, repeat. Every species they encountered followed. Predictable patterns. fight to survive, surrender when defeat was certain, preserve their own lives above all else. But humans weren't following the pattern. Throughout the system, human crews were making choices that the devourer hive mind couldn't understand. Ships' captains were sacrificing their vessels to save strangers. Civilians were volunteering for dangerous rescue missions. Wounded soldiers were giving up their medical supplies to help injured enemies. The Devourer Collective Intelligence, designed to analyze and counter every possible military strategy, was encountering something it had never faced before. Tactics based on love rather than logic. "Admiral," Dr. Hayes continued, "I'm detecting what appears to be a communication from the enemy flagship. It's addressed to you personally." Chen activated the main communication system. The voice that emerged was the same layered, mechanical tone they had heard before, but now it sounded uncertain, almost confused. "Human Chin, your species' behavior does not match any pattern in our database. Explanation required." Chen stepped forward, her voice carrying to every ship in both fleets. "You want to understand us," she said. "Here's your explanation. We're the species that travels across the galaxy to help people we've never met. We're the civilization that risks everything to save someone else's children. We don't fight wars to conquer or destroy. We fight wars to protect." "This is illogical," the Devourer voice replied. "Preservation of individual genetic lines takes priority over protection of unrelated organisms. All species follow this pattern." "Not us," Chen said simply. "We heard a distress call from people who had been dead for 3 centuries, and we came anyway. We brought teachers and doctors and farmers because we don't just save lives, we rebuild them." Throughout the system, the human rescue operations continued. Medical ships treated wounded Devourer prisoners alongside human casualties. Construction vessels began building temporary shelters for refugees. Colony ships prepared to relocate entire populations of survivors to safe worlds. "Analysis incomplete," the Devourer voice said, and for the first time, it sounded almost lost. "Your tactical decisions reduce survival probability. Your resource allocation is inefficient. Your behavior contradicts evolutionary imperatives." Captain Kane's voice joined the conversation from his damaged bridge. "That's where you're wrong. Our survival isn't just about keeping our bodies alive. It's about keeping our souls alive, and our souls die when we abandon people who need help." Other human voices began joining the conversation. Ship captains, medical officers, even civilians on the evacuation vessels. "We came because it was the right thing to do," said Captain Martinez from his garbage hauler. "We stayed because you don't leave family behind," added Dr. Sarah Kim from a medical vessel. "We fought because some things are worth dying for," said Commander Torres from the damaged Spite Incarnate. The Devourer hive mind processed these statements, trying to fit them into algorithms designed around conquest and survival. But human compassion didn't fit any of their models. "Final query," the voice said. "What are you?" Chen looked around the bridge at her crew, then out at the human fleet. Military vessels and civilian ships, rescue operations and combat missions, all working together to save lives and protect the innocent. "We're the neighbors you never knew you had," she said. "We're the people who hear someone crying in the dark and come running to help. We're the species that believes everyone deserves a chance to live, to love, to build something better." Paused, her voice becoming stronger. "We're humanity, and we don't abandon our friends." The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the entire system. Then, one by one, the Devourer ships began powering down their weapons. The massive flagship's biomechanical hull stopped its constant shifting and growing, becoming still for the first time in millennia. "Unprecedented," the voice said finally. "Species classification, unknown, threat assessment, inconclusive, adaptation, protocols, insufficient." Dr. Hayes looked up from her instruments in amazement. "Admiral, the entire Devourer fleet they're leaving. jumping to hyperspace, all of them. Chen watched as the enemy vessels disappeared one by one, vanishing into the darkness between stars. But she knew they weren't retreating. They were returning to whatever distant corner of the universe they had come from, carrying with them the knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy lived a species that fought wars to save lives. All ships, Chen broadcast, continue rescue operations. I want every survivor in this system brought to safety, every wounded person treated, every refugee given a new home. The aftermath took weeks. The human fleet worked tirelessly to evacuate the Viridian structure, relocate survivors, treat the wounded, and begin the long process of rebuilding lives that had been shattered centuries ago. Commander Zara Thorne stood on the bridge of a human colony ship, watching as the last Viridian families were settled into new homes. Beside her, Captain Kane reviewed the reports from throughout the system. 47,000 Viridian survivors relocated to 7 different worlds, he said. Another 12,000 beings from other species, some we thought were extinct, also rescued and resettled. Medical teams report that most of the physical injuries can be healed, and the psychological support programs are already showing positive results. Thorne shook her head in amazement. 300 years of captivity ended in 2 weeks because someone answered a distress call. Kane smiled. That's what neighbors do. Captain, Thorne said quietly, what happens when the Devourers encounter other species? What happens when they meet civilizations that can't confuse their algorithms with acts of compassion? Kane's expression became serious. Then those civilizations will send out distress calls. And if they do... He gestured to the human fleet surrounding them, still working to save lives and rebuild hope. Well, humanity will be listening. Years later, the galaxy would remember the Battle of Kepler 442 not for